Welcome to Torchlight's Exceptional Parenting Podcast, where we talk with the nation's top experts about today's toughest parenting challenges. Whether you're concerned about your child's development, learning, behavior, or you just want to make family time more enjoyable, we share the practical solutions and tools that can help.
Hello, podcast listeners. This episode of the Exceptional Parenting Podcast was recorded shortly before the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. What follows is a lively discussion with an expert about children and procrastination that originally took place within the context of a very different world where children were physically in school and families were striving to keep up with overscheduled lives. Now, that world, in many ways, already feels like it could have been a lifetime ago. And yet, the topic of procrastination seems as relevant as ever. With most students around the country now engaged in distance learning to the extent that they can engage, education more than before requires that our children, most especially our older children, be self-directed, well-organized, and aware of their personal responsibilities and actions. And those are not easy skills for most children to learn. But our guest is going to share with you how to teach those skills to your children, which will help them get through this uncertain time and beyond. I hope that all of you and your families are healthy and safe. And with that in mind, let's move on to our original episode. We hope you enjoy it. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to an all-new episode of the Exceptional Parenting Podcast, brought to you by Torchlight. I'm your host, Stefanie Boucher, and today we are going to discuss a topic that I think is very much a universal challenge for parents, and that is kids and procrastination. Whether you're raising a tot or a teen, you probably know the drill. You ask your child to do something, and as a response, you may get anything from, "I'll do it in a minute," which of course is never really just a minute, right? The statement often seems to be code for, "I really don't plan on doing that at all," or "not right now, I'm busy, in a little while." And if your child is older and in school, and you're talking about something like chores or homework, well, forget about it. There's really no sense of urgency there for most kids. So why does this happen? What is procrastination really about? Where does it come from? And most importantly, what can parents do to get kids off the procrastination train and on the road to getting things done? I am here today with Leslie Josel. Leslie is a respected resource on ADHD and executive functioning in students. She launched her business Order Out of Chaos in 2004 after her son was diagnosed with ADHD, executive dysfunction, and other learning differences. And she's also the creator of the award-winning Academic Planner, a tool for time management. In addition to authoring What's the Deal with Teens and Time Management, a parent's guide to helping your teen succeed. Her work and her writing are regularly featured in Attitude Magazine and Family Circle. And she's also a public speaker and conducts workshops internationally. Leslie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're grateful to have you as well. So for the sake of not procrastinating, let's just dive right into today's discussion. I think it's important to point out that most kids and most people really, because I'm not making adults exempt from this discussion, most kids procrastinate to some extent. And so I think it would be helpful to make a distinction about when parents should be concerned about procrastination, like what's typical and when does it become something that is sort of a disruptive pattern of behavior.
I'm so glad you said that everyone is doing it because I really feel so. I am an academic life coach. So not only do I work with students, but we also work with parents. And I will tell you that procrastination is the number one worry that parents come to our table with. So we are constantly hearing about my student is procrastinating. What do I do? So it is real. It is universal. I mean, I think there was a recent study a few years back that said over 80 to 90% of college students procrastinate on a regular basis, and their counterparts are not that far behind. So in some ways, it's very normalized. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it's a very definitely like slippery slope. In some ways it's very normalized. Like, yeah, all the kids are doing it. Sorry, that's my little thing. But on the other hand, when do you know, exactly to your question, when your child is what I call a functional procrastinator, meaning they might be procrastinating, but it's not deeply affecting their day-to-day life? And when should you be on high alert that something is seriously going on? And what we know is that when the procrastination really starts to bleed into other areas of their life and really have a negative impact, whether it's increasing in anxiety or your child is really stressed out or it's negatively impacting grades. And I mean really negatively impacting. I don't mean like, oh, I didn't do so well on one exam, but when we're seeing zeros in homework being turned in or complete exams just not being studied for. Do you know what I mean? That's a real chronic, even socially. And I want to make this super clear too, that procrastination in students doesn't only know academics. It could be things at home. It could be just having the actionability of getting up to be with friends or to practice an instrument or do the chores you're supposed to do. It doesn't necessarily mean just academics.
Perhaps even having an unpleasant conversation with somebody. That's another thing people tend to procrastinate on, right?
You say that, I would say that I'm an academic life coach, and there are definitely days when I'm coaching a student and all we're talking about is, did you respond to that email? And what is it about that email that is making you stuck? What is it about it that's making you procrastinate? And that email might have nothing to do with an actual academic issue, but it has to do with how do I respond? So I think that's a great distinction to make, that really what we're looking for is where's the procrastination bleeding into and does it have real negative impact in other areas of your student's life?
Yeah, great point. Great place to start. So why do people have this tendency to procrastinate? And again, like I said, we all do it to some extent. What are the various reasons or underlying causes of procrastination?
Here's something very funny I'm going to say. I'm allowed to say this. I actually just finished writing my next book, and it is on procrastination, and it's geared to students. So I have been studying this topic, like I have been in the trenches in this topic for the past year. And another really good distinction that I want parents to hear me say is that for the most part, again, none of this is black and white. We have to remember a lot of this is brain-based behavior. So when you see one student who procrastinates, you see one student who procrastinates. Everyone comes to the table with different reasons. But overall, students definitely procrastinate for different reasons than adults, and it shows up differently. And I think that's another really important distinction. So I kind of am in two camps when it comes to why students procrastinate. And there's been a tremendous amount of research and articles lately that it's not a time management issue, that it's a self-regulation issue. And I am not 100% in that camp for students. I think that for some students, the procrastination does stem from a lack of skill. So like simply put, if your student does not know how to study, they're not going to do it. And no matter how much cajoling and nudging and pestering and nagging is not going to make it all of a sudden happen. If your student lacks the skill to really understand how to study, know when they're done, know what they don't know, it's not going to happen. And therefore, that's going to look like procrastination. If your child doesn't have a time sense, an ability to know how long something takes them to get done, they don't know how to do future awareness, meaning something that is going to happen a week from now needs to be focused on now, that's going to show up as procrastination. That's a very skill-driven procrastination. But then there's my students, and this is probably what I see the most. I call it my TOO student. Everything is just too much, too big, too vague, too overwhelming, and too difficult. And I equate that with the brain being almost able to like lift a 2-pound weight. That's all the brain is capable of doing. And when we give our students something to have to figure out on their own, like how do you break down this assignment? Or how do you break down your studying? Or how do you even figure out what you need to study? That's the equivalent of a 5-pound weight. And your student cannot do it. It's just too big. It's too much for them. And then I believe, particularly in the college sector, what we see is there's that lack of accountability, which is why I think the numbers for college students have gone up dramatically. Because as your student moves through middle school or high school, there is a sense of accountability. The teacher breaks down the assignment for them, puts in the due dates for them. There's structure. Whereas in college, it's here's the assignment, knock yourself out, figure it out, get it done. Here's the deadline.
Yeah. So self-driven. Yeah, you're right.
Very self-driven. And then do not discount the whole, like, this is boring. This is mind-numbing. That I just don't give it, you know what? And that is,
right.
You know, as adults, our brains have kind of grown so that we are able to overcome that. I don't really want to do it, but I need to. With students, less so. And then honestly, there's the distractions. And that's like the 600-pound gorilla in the middle of the room that just as a generation, our focusing has decreased. You know what I mean? Our distractions.
Absolutely.
So we can't discount that sometimes a duck is a duck, right? Sometimes it's not a deep-seated, what am I really looking for? Sometimes our students are just distracted, whether it's an internal distraction or an external one. They're just distracted. They're on Netflix. They're on their phones. You know, they're texting. They've got their phones attached to them, as do we as adults. So again, we're all at fault there. So again, for every kid, there's a million reasons.
Yeah, and I like this discussion about these various causes because, you know, of course there is in some cases, and for all of us some of the time, an element of, oh, I just don't want to do that. It's so boring. You know, I'll do it later. There is some of that, but the common thread with almost every one of those all of the other reasons that you just mentioned, it becomes clear that procrastination is a symptom of something rather than a problem in and of itself. So that's a really important point to make, I think, that you have to kind of look at your child or talk to the child, figure out kind of what is going on for them in that particular occasion, and really think about what the underlying issue is. Like you said, is it an issue of them not knowing how to do something, or is it an issue of them not understanding time, all of these things? So that's a great point to make. Thank you for that.
No, you're so welcome. And I think it's one of the biggest points we need to really understand when it comes to students is that, again, they show up differently. So for example, you're given, this is as granular as it gets. If you are, let's say, a math teacher and you assign the homework, and the homework is to go to page 52 and do problems 1 through 5. Now, we're not discussing academics, meaning does your child even understand the math involved? That's not my point. My point is, if you ask any student, do you understand what is being asked of you? They will go, absolutely. It's no big deal. Page 52, 1 through 5. Their brain is not being asked to do work it can't do. But now let's switch it up. And I'm not disparaging teachers. Trust me, I'm not. I'm just showing the difference between an assignment being very clear and not being overwhelming in the sense of what they understand to do. But when a student gets the assignment of continue studying, let's say it's a Monday night and their test is Wednesday, and the homework assignment is to continue studying, that's the shutdown. That's where I feel the procrastination really, really shows up. And so that's where, as a parent, we're looking at playing a little I Spy. You know, you've heard me talk before, and we also get asked a lot about, like, why isn't homework being done? And I always say homework doesn't start at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 8 o'clock at night. It starts the minute your child shows up at school that day. And it's similar with procrastination. If your child is having great difficulty in school and that's presenting itself at home as procrastination, quite possibly the issue is stemming at 8 o'clock in the morning, whether in math or history or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. It's a really holistic viewpoint. I love the way you frame that. So what I find, and I think so many parents would agree with this statement, in an attempt to help children avoid procrastination, parents can end up feeling like they're like a constant nag, right? Like, come on, like, let's do it. And, you know, this can lead to tension, conflict, resentment between the parent and child that becomes an all-out battle zone at times. How can parents support some change and some movement in this area without feeling like they're always stuck in a policing role?
That's a great question. And one we get asked a lot too. So I think there's a lot of levels here. It's not an easy answer, and there's definitely different points to that question. So here's what I'm going to start from the top down. I believe this, and I think I believe it more because I am a coach, that when your relationship really becomes defined by the academics of your child, it's time to call in the troops. Because if that is, When my son was younger, we had a coach because I did not want my relationship with my son to slowly, and anything I say about him, he knows I say, so I just want to make that clear that I have his permission. But I did not want our relationship to solely be based on that. And that added a lot of toxicity into the home. So there's nothing wrong with calling in the troops. You would be amazed what parents say. Like, I tried that for years. You say it once. And I said, yeah, right? It happens all the time. But not everybody can do that, or not everybody needs like a full-on coach. What I have found is that everything we were discussing, and I'm going to keep going back to this, and I don't want to make this sciencey because that's so not me. I'm much more user-friendly, but we are talking about brain-based behavior, and we're talking about the fact that your child's brain is not fully developed. And I say this a lot, like we're all really good at knowing how to exercise different parts of our bodies, our arms, our legs, what have you. But how do you exercise your child's brain? Brain is a muscle. Right? How do you strengthen it so your child does learn how to activate on their own, or does learn some willpower to say, "Ooh, I really need to put my phone down." You know what I mean? And step away from the phone and move to what they need to do. And what I teach parents all the time is asking your child questions. So instead of you being the one, not screaming, but nagging, pestering, you have to do. Number one, you need to make sure whatever you're asking your child to do, they know how. Sorry, I have to say that. It can be as simple as a parent going, my child will never make their bed. Well, does your child know how to? Are you supporting them in a way that they understand how to do that? The second part of that equation is asking them questions, meaning instead of you saying, I know you have this and you need to do that, I like to turn it around and have a parent go, so tell me, I know that you have these 2 tests on Friday. You don't get home from soccer practice till late on Thursday night. I'm just making that up. What is your plan? That's studying done.
I like that.
Tell me what your plan is. And what I love about that question, and I have a ton of them, but I'm going to stick on this one, is it can be used if your child is 8 or 18. Because what you're trying to do there is create some future awareness. So even if you have an 8-year-old, what's your plan after dinner? It doesn't have to be a week from now. It could be a half hour from now. And what we know about future awareness is that as your child grows, their future awareness grows. Which is why an 8-year-old only might be able to see till tomorrow, or where an 18-year-old in December can see to May. Do you know what I mean? They can see long.
Yeah.
But what you're doing is you're forcing in a good way for your child now to have to figure out, what's my plan? What's my priority? It's another great question. I always have parents asking, what's your priority today? As opposed to what you have to do. The priority is way more actionable. Well, what you're doing is it's almost like you're getting now your child to super glue. One of the things I do with students on my own is when I try to teach procrastination, busters, I don't know how you say it, is you've got to teach awareness first. You've got to get them aware before you can actually implement strategy. So asking your child questions makes them more aware of what they have to do, what they have to see, versus you holding all the cards.
Yeah. And what if they seem bewildered, though, when you ask them the question about what their plan is?
Well, how you're going to ask an 8-year-old something is very different how you're going to ask an 18-year-old. I mean, that just goes without saying. What I asked you, what I mentioned before, like, oh, hey, I see you have 2 tests. That's a higher level question. And that's definitely for an older student. But, you know, what's your plan after dinner is a little more simple. The child could just say, even I'm going to take my shower. I'm going to go sit down and do my homework, but it's getting them to think. But my favorite question when a kid comes back to me with, I don't know, and I don't mind the I don't knows. A lot of parents are like, I hate I don't know. I hate I don't know. I love I don't know because I don't know lets you see where there might be a break in the chain. I respond with, tell me what you do know. Tell me what you do know. I'd use this on college students. So if I'm using this on college students, you can easily use this on younger students. And you can lead them. It's like guided questioning. It doesn't, again, this isn't an overnight thing, but what you're doing is you're building strength in the brain. Tell me what you know. Do you know you have soccer practice on Thursday night? Yeah, I do know I have that. Great. Do you know you have 2 tests on Friday? No, I didn't know. There you go. Why didn't he know? Where is that breakdown? Is the breakdown that he can't find it on the homework, the homework website? Did he not write it down? Is he just organized? So now is it a procrastination problem or is it an organizational problem?
Yeah, yeah. And then maybe using it as an opportunity to help them learn to plan, like just that you may need to kind of offer some guidance on creating a plan, especially for younger kids. But, like you said, the goal is to get them to think about these kinds of things and get them in the habit of doing it.
All of one of my favorite things to do with younger students when it comes to planning, again, this goes back to making everything a level playing field. And I know it can't always be. Trust me. I know that. I have my own kid, and plus I've been, coaching for years. But one of the tools that I've used over the years that really works, and here's just a little bit of change in it, is sitting down. And here's an interesting thing. If you're a parent and you have 2 kids, let's say, or 3 kids, but one of them is the one who's challenged with procrastination and your others aren't, it doesn't matter. You bring everybody to the table. Everybody shows up with their calendars, their phones, whatever they're doing. And it becomes this level playing field. It's not you nagging your child. What do you have to do this week? How are you going to get it done? Why haven't you started yet? It's more, you need to know my schedule. I need to know yours. Let's plan together. I used to do this all the time with my own child and say, okay, this is great. You have to be at theater practice on Thursday, right? See, there's the
yeah.
And he'd go, yes. I'm like, what's your plan on getting home that night? I'm just making this up right now. Me and Dad are not home. Oh, I need to get myself a ride. See what I mean? Like it becomes like he doesn't feel put upon. He doesn't feel nagged. It becomes a little more of a joint effort of everybody needs to be planning so that everybody is sharing kind of the burden of what everybody has to do. It's a little more involved in that. But again, these are just tools that parent can use to try to strengthen your child's brain and where your child doesn't feel that you're the one solely nagging them.
It's interesting because so much of the way we deal with our kids is all in our approach. I love the approach that you're describing because it's not nagging based at all. As you mentioned, it's not, hey, did you get a ride? You need a ride. Did you call for a ride yet? Did you ask your friend for a ride yet? It's not all of that, which I think, even really well-intentioned parents sometimes have a tendency to do. But it's just very matter of fact. It's very like almost team oriented in that like, hey, like this is what's going on with the household this week. I have this, you have this, this is the reality. And they're seeing the need and the potential consequences for themselves, which is great adulting, right? It's exactly what they need to be developing to go out into the world on their own.
And obviously it's going to look different. For an 8-year-old, you listen, this is now a whole other conversation, but I always feel this way. My parenting strategy that I teach all the time is that it's your job as the parent to create the parameters. It's your child's job to negotiate them. And that parameters grow as your child grows. Obviously, when your child is 8, you're in charge. Do you know? You just are. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But you can still within that give your child. So if you have an 8-year-old at home who procrastinates with getting started on their homework, your response as a parent can be, what time would you like to start your homework? Do you want to start it at 4:17 or 4:33? So what you've done just there is you have set the parameter, but you're giving your child some negotiating ability there to figure out which time works for them so they feel a little more in control. So therefore, they're more likely to activate because they had some say in it. And here's a little fun fact, but by making it an odd amount of time, and this is something that is my thing, you've now made it fun and interesting. Because would you rather start your homework at 4:17 or at 4 o'clock? I would much rather start it at 4:17. Way more fun.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that I always am telling parents again is if anything you can do with your child, make it an odd amount because it's way more memorable. And if it's way more memorable, they'll end up procrastinating less.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we just discussed a little bit about, the way we approach things. Are there any other examples you can think of maybe where a parent could be unintentionally enabling procrastination to continue?
That's a hard one because I really think you have to know your child. I do not have a problem with, particularly if you have a child with weak executive functions or ADHD, they need help. I call it they need help at point of performance. So my biggest thing is you need to teach your child skills. That's it. It's not a black and white, but here's what, to your point, I think are the things that we need to really be focusing on. We need to be focusing on structure. So you as the parent, again, can create some structure and let your child kind of navigate within that structure. So that's my way of kind of you're setting the box and they're within it trying to figure stuff out. So I kind of feel that is a way for parents to be involved, help in a healthy way, because again, your child does need your help. We know that. I don't think we can just kind of say for a 12-year-old who has serious executive dysfunction or even ADHD that they can navigate some of this on their own. I don't. I'm sorry. I don't believe in helicoptering, but I do believe in scaffolding. I really do.
Yeah, I love when people talk about scaffolding. And for those of you listening who don't know what scaffolding is, well, maybe you should describe it because you probably have a better description than I do.
For example, if I know that let's say when my son was younger and he had a paper to start writing, I knew that was really difficult for him to get started. So again, what I would do is give him times of say, we have to get started. When do you want to start it? I would allow him to pick that time and to activate, but then I would be there to provide maybe the body doubling, meaning I would be close by. So I would act as a fourth wheel to keep him anchored. Or if he was having a hard time writing, I would possibly be the one sitting at the computer, him telling me what he wanted to write, but I was just typing his words. So I wasn't writing for him, but I was lending some scaffolding and some structure so that he could kind of activate and walk through the process. And here's the thing. We know that. Look at your child. If your child has to meet their study group at 8:00 in the morning on a Saturday, they are going to get up and go because no one wants to be that kid.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know that. I see this with my college students. I'm like, you got up and met your group at 8:00 on Saturday. And they're like, heck yeah, I don't want to be the kid that didn't show up. I don't want to be that kid. Now fast forward and have that kid be by themselves. There's no way they're getting out of bed to start studying by themselves at 8. So even in college, having some structure, having accountability, that's probably my two, other than learning skill, accountability and structure, I feel, are what parents need to help their children so that they can walk through that procrastination maze. And I think that's what we kind of see where the rails fall off, so to speak, or the wheels fall off, is when the structure is gone and the accountability is gone.
Yeah. And it's really an important issue to deal with because often a negative cycle of procrastination that leads to negative outcomes, as we discussed at the beginning of our conversation, I think over time that could really tend to eat away at a kid's self-esteem. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, what I want to make sure everybody knows is that procrastination is not a one-size-fits-all. So I believe there are a few things that I believe, and a lot of this I believe because I've been working for students for so long, that procrastinating doesn't necessarily make you a procrastinator. And that's really interesting because think about it. We all put things off from time to time. We do.
We do.
Hello. Give me a coffee versus sometimes, even as an adult, do I have to write my columns for attitude, or would I rather be watching The Crown, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I know what I'd pick. Yeah.
Oh my God. So it's really hard sometimes, even as an adult, to constantly be motivated.
It is.
I'm going to talk a lot about that in a minute. So, we also don't always finish what we started. And sometimes that's not horrible or detrimental to our well-being. And it even works out in the end. So I think we really need to make that distinction. Is your child procrastinating from time to time? It's really okay. We all do it. Okay. We've got to normalize it. But I also really believe that not all procrastination looks the same. And that's where you as the parent really need to be playing I Spy, because there's a huge difference between delaying doing something until the last minute, but still getting it done and even getting it done well, versus not doing it at all and suffering massive consequences for it. I believe that you can be a functional procrastinator. There are many people out there, particularly those with EF or ADHD, who really need the immediacy to get activated. They do.
Yeah, there are lots of people I know that will tell me they do their best work under pressure.
My son is that kid. He is the absolute procrastinator. But here's the difference why he's still time aware. And there's that difference. He still can say to himself, well, my paper's due Thursday, but I know that I can sit down on Monday or Tuesday and knock it out because I know what else is happening. So he still has a time sense. There's still a sense of planning. So you as a parent might be looking at your child going, I don't get it. He still hasn't started this. But if your child is not stressed and your child can get it done and does it well, and I'm not even going to define well because we all have different definitions, well, then leave it alone. Leave it alone. Some people really need that immediacy to stay uber focused, to get done what they need to get done, and even get their creative juices flowing. So that's why I say procrastination looks different for all of us.
That sounds like planned procrastination, which I think could be a thing.
And then sometimes we're even what we call productive procrastinators. I see a lot of kids who do that too. Where I feel we really need to watch our children is when the procrastination is because they might be perfectionists or feeling major anxiety. We didn't really talk about that. Where they can't get started because there's this overwhelming dread of if I don't do it perfect, I'm not going to do it at all. And that's another reason where I think you really need to be like on top of things. That's a whole other type of procrastination. I do work with a lot of students like that, and I try to have them break things down into like must do, could do, should do's, so that we can really only focus on what needs to happen. I like them to, again, list their priorities, because that really helps to break out perfectionistic kind of tendencies when I have them just focus on what is the priority.
It's like a fear of failure almost.
Right. If I can't do everything and I can't do it perfectly, then I'm not going to do it. So again, we keep wrapping it back to you will know, absolutely sense where procrastination in your student is coming from, because you'll see it. It will bleed. You will know if it's an anxiety, if it's a perfectionism, is it, I don't know how to study, because they show up differently. They just do.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more, before we kind of begin to wrap up, because you hit on an interesting note there. I feel like to some degree, I have one of those perfectionistic kids. And you talked about, so I'd love to know more about navigating that tendency. So you said something about listing out priorities. Can you clarify that?
But I really, really want to make sure that I put this out there as I am acutely aware of where I begin and where I end. Meaning, I'm a life coach for teens and college students. So but if you are seeing your child really having anxiety moments or really having perfectionist tendencies, and they are really getting in their way significantly, that's another conversation. And I just want to be mindful of that. What I'm suggesting are like, things that have worked for my students over time and within the realm of like a perfectionism or an anxiety that I can kind of work within. I hope I said that correctly, if you know what I'm saying.
I do. Yep, I do.
So one of the things that I have found that really tends to break that is the priority. When you ask your student, or I ask a student what they have to do today, usually what I get is, I have to do everything. I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this, because they heap it on, they pile it on. There's not a differentiation of what must happen versus, what else I really want to do, but doesn't necessarily have to be done. So when I change the dialogue around and ask them what their priorities are, number one, you're building executive function, because now all of a sudden they have to prioritize, they have to categorize, they have to figure out what might be the hardest thing, what might be the easiest thing for them, what is really due tomorrow versus what can wait. It really changes the internal dialogue in their head. And I'm able to, not all the time, obviously, but break some of that perfectionist of I have to do everything and I have to do it perfectly. Just let me know what your priority is. What's the priority for today? The other thing I like to do is have them list out in 3 categories: the must do, the should do, and the could do. So the must do is the priority. The could do is, that would be the next level. The should do is the next level. And the could do is like, I don't really need to get, do you really need to get to that now? No, I really don't. I find that when they see it, it does help to visualize it and helps to just take some of that anxiety down, you might say. So that's number one. And the other thing, and I don't know if you're going to laugh at this, but I will tell you, this is one of my absolute favorite tools to use for college students. And it works, I would say, about 90% of the time. When a student gets that syllabus, 90% of the time, they will go to the back of it and just want to see when their midterms are, their finals are, if there's a paper due. That's about it. The rest of it, they rarely read unless you work with me, because I give every student who works with me a syllabus test. You must know your syllabus. But in that syllabus is information that is gold. And what it is, it's the percentages. So most professors will write out that your homework is worth 10%, each test is worth 20%. See what I'm saying? And what happens is I'll either have a child who is a perfectionist and is just studying and studying and studying and right, or the opposite, can't get started. So what we do is we go to those percentages to see what everything is worth. And a lot of times, knowing that something is worth a lot will actually help a student activate. Or, and I know this is a little bit off tangent, if we notice that, because I've had a lot of kids who they're such perfectionists that if they don't do well on something, they shut down completely and won't activate on anything else. If we see that the test they just took, or the lab they just did, or the homework assignment they just turned in was only worth about 10% of their grade or 15% of their grade, they see that they have more percentage left. I'm able to get them out of that headspace. I'm able to take that parade of horribles and shut it down and get them to not be so anxious, not be so overwhelmed, and them to be able to say, okay, I still have a ton more left of my grade, and therefore I'm able to activate. It's an interesting tool, but it seems to work for my college kids.
Yeah, it's really psychological, isn't it?
If I can present black and white information, that tends to cut it. Because the emotion part of it, our brains tend to run away with things. So if I can bring it back to what is due tomorrow? What tests do you have this week? What is the must do? What is the percentage? There's that saying, you can't argue with the data. That really, really helps to normalize it all. Not saying it's the perfect fix because again, all of this is on a continuum, but it really does help to manage a tremendous amount of it with my students.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. So I would love to know, just in the sense of giving perspective to all of the worried parents out there, if a child tends to be someone who engages in this procrastinating behavior a lot as a child, is it common that they grow up to be people who don't procrastinate so much? I mean, what's the success rate that you see in overcoming this behavior?
If I was looking on a higher level, what I would tell you is my belief is that I don't really believe you cure your procrastination, but I believe with the right tools and the right strategies, you can absolutely learn to manage it. So that does not mean that you don't outgrow some of the ways, because here's the thing that also we need to remember is that as your student grows, the things that they procrastinate on will change. So if you have a student that loathes school and hates to study and doesn't know how to study, eventually that piece of their life is going to go away. What I find so fascinating is that I have parents who say to me all the time, I can't get my child to activate at all with study, but they get up but if they have an internship or a summer job, they are up, they are out, they are on time because they love to work. So there's that piece. We have to remember that students procrastinate for different reasons than adults do. So just by that nature, some of that procrastination will fall away. The other thing we have to remember is the brain will become stronger. The brain will grow. The brain will develop. The brain will become an adult brain. So if you were seeing your child when they were younger be a super, super duper procrastinator, and all of a sudden you're scratching your head because they're in college and you're noticing that they're able to think ahead or plan their time, or actually go to a study session, what you're possibly saying on a host of things is though that their brain is matured, right? They're learning time management skills. They're learning those life skills because the brain is starting to catch up. So that in and of itself you will see.
Right. And worth pointing out that the age of 25, I think they say, is when the brain becomes fully mature in terms of one's ability to be able to think long term and see consequences and plan for the future. It's age 25. So it's really kind of developmentally appropriate for kids not to be able to think the way we think.
Well, I think that's important. So some researchers say even later. And what we're missing in this whole conversation is that there's something called executive age. If we are looking at children specifically, or students is kind of how I like to say it, who have executive dysfunction, like meaning if they have real challenges with organizing or time management or planning or initiating or even impulsivity, then they're going to be at a 30% less age for that type of challenge. So if you have a child at home who's, let's say, 13, and they have no time management awareness whatsoever, they're not going to be 13 for that. They might be 13 academically, they might be 13 socially, they might be 13 verbally, if you know what I mean. But when it comes to their time management, they're going to be 9. And what a 9-year-old is capable of doing is really different than a 13-year-old. And also, the support and scaffold that child is going to be very different. So I think that is a huge piece that we as parents, so that goes back to that whole, how do you strengthen the brain? And one of my biggest things is asking your child questions. Think about it. And this is just a funny thing, and I don't even know if this is really, but if your child is just standing in a room saying to you, I'm hungry, most parents answer that. They will say, oh, you're hungry? Do you want a snack? Do you want this? Do you want that? Your child didn't ask a question. So why are you answering it?
Interesting point.
Unless your child is bleeding on the floor, there should be no immediacy for you as the parent to solve the problem. Because when you're solving problems, believe it or not, you're taking that strengthening piece out of your child's brain, which is all part of that procrastination too. If I'm just standing in a room going, I'm hungry, and you're willing to do everything in your power to feed that, well then there's no need for me to activate. There's no need for me not to procrastinate. You know what I mean? The better question is, what is it you need?
That is really interesting.
That's a whole other podcast.
That could be a whole different topic, Leslie. We might have to have you back.
I call it raising problem solvers versus direction followers.
Yes.
So, but yet that also leads into procrastination as well. Because if you direction followers, there's huge procrastination because they haven't developed that skill on their own. It's fascinating, but these are, all different tools and tips that kind of lead us back to this conversation. The only other thing I want to say to parents, and I don't mean to disparage parents, I am one, but kids that tend to procrastinate hear a lot of negative self-talk, whether it's negative self-talk on their own and then negative talk to them. They've been called lazy, they've been called stupid, they've been called weak, they've been called hopeless, and that's not necessarily the case. So I just would they know that, they feel that, trust me. I hear that from your students. They feel it. They really do. So I'm hoping that this podcast event has just helped us understand that procrastination is not black and white, that there's a tremendous amount of shades of gray, and some procrastination is fine and it's typical and it's even okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Leslie, for raising all of these really, really great points. I am so excited to share all of these sort of skill building suggestions with our families. I've really enjoyed your perspective. I know our listeners will as well. If you are listening to this episode and you'd like to know more about Leslie, her speaking engagements, or her consulting, you can visit her website, which is orderOOKchaos.com. Did I get that correct?
You did. Thank you.
Oh, yay. And for those of you who have a Torchlight account, if you'd like to learn more about this topic and many of the suggestions that Leslie brought up here today, I recommend you watch the on-demand webinar called Homework Madness. Leslie did this webinar with us this fall. It's really awesome, really practical. I can't speak about it highly enough. And that is available in the Torchlight platform. That is all we have for you today. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Torchlight's Exceptional Parenting Podcast. Find this and other episodes on iTunes, Spreaker, and Podcast Go. If you're interested in bringing Torchlight Child or any of Torchlight's other caregiving products to your workplace, please contact info@torchlight.care. That's info@torchlight.care.